This is concentric and concentric-like finger flexion through the metacarpophalangeal joint, especially useful for developing that finger strength for open-handed drag and pocketed grips where we're trying to flex through that MCP joint. So if we're doing it concentric-like, what we do need is a lift implement like this with a training edge. Training edge is going to be the largest possible edge size that I can find that doesn't support that distal interphalangeal joint, so that joint close to the fingertips is not actually making contact with this, right? Now for the concentric, I can use an amalgam of weights. If you do have access to free weights and you've got a loading pin that is a bit more stable, you'll eke out a little bit more strength out of this, a little bit more gain, so I would recommend it. But I use a lot of ankle and weight vests within this small gym that I have. So we're gonna go ahead and do that just with a rope bag. I'll show you what the concentric looks like. So what I wanna make sure of is that I can lift this off the ground with a relatively locked out position. So we're in here. I don't wanna be having to lift this up because that's taxing the shoulders and the back. So we're just standing straight up. My shoulders are locked out, right? My legs are locked out, so they're not the thing lifting this thing. I'll kind of show you from the side what it looks like as well, right? And my grip is completely open at this point. So if I go any further, then I'm just gonna drop the board entirely. Do make sure your feet are away enough that you don't drop the weights on yourself. So what this looks like is we're focusing on flexing that MCP joint. So trying to just lift with that. As you flex this and are straining against the weight, then you'll notice the other joints will flex as well. That's perfectly fine. The muscles that flex the MCP joint also flex these joints. So lift this up and I make sure the board is enough away that I can actually get that range of motion. And we flex. We're trying to get this up towards the base of the palm of our hands. You'll notice my thumb's going out to the side. If I try to get them in behind the board, I end up in more of a crimped position where I'm flexing at the PIP joint predominantly. So we do this raising our thumbs up. I'll show you what this looks like from the side as well. So open-handed, heavily flex to that MCP joint, back down. Right? Okay, that's the concentric. Okay, try to get full range of motion as the weight gets higher. It'll be a bit harder, just the fingers don't like to pull in nearly that far. We're used to that isometric gripping somewhere out here rather than compressing down to this, right? This isn't a very common grip position for us to be really far down. So just be mindful of that. That range of motion will slightly reduce as the weight gets nearer to your max. So with an isometric overcoming, I'm talking about trying to pull against a movable object. So in this case, I don't really need anything fancy. I need something like, I've just got a deadlift platform, anything that's a hard, solid object that you can fasten a bit of a sling around. So I've got a Dyneema personal anchor here. And what I want to do is position this in a similar way, but I want to be at about mid-thigh level. So that gives me a little bit of range of motion so my fingers aren't completely stretched out, but I put a little bit of force into this as I stand up. You kind of hear it in the creaking. I'm going to repeat that same motion, but I obviously don't have that same range of motion because this isn't a movable object. There'll be some flexion as that little bit of stretch comes out of the system as everything begins to bind up. So we'll show you what that looks like first. So I'm up here, completely open grip again. And what I'm going to do is a 5 count. The first 1, 2 is really for that recruitment of muscle. Then we're holding that position for 3, 4, 5. So we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What you might notice is that for that 1, 2, my knuckles or my joint is beginning to flex, and then we're holding the same position for 3, 4, 5. So once again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're trying to do that same motion, so you see the same thumb placement, everything. We're just getting stuck into it. If you are doing this as a strength training routine, we don't always want to go to our max, so we're not pulling absolutely as hard as possible. You'll need to determine how hard that really feels for you, what an RPE of 8 or 9 would really be if you were trying out your 100% first, and then figuring out what a strength training routine would really be. I can also use something like a dynamometer. I've got a little one from Findeck right here. Go ahead and attach to, this is a bit easier to figure out what 80% really is. So if I go in here, I've got the endurance app. We're gonna go ahead and just measure our maximum voluntary contraction. So go ahead and get myself locked out. You'll see this number rise as I do that initial lockout. Perfectly reasonable. Your MCP joint will still be trying to flex at the maximum force it shows because it's trying to overcome that initial force you have. But what you need to do is stop yourself from leaning further into it or pulling with your arms, because that can make this reading kind of go off. So lock yourself out, know about where you sit. So we're already about 50 pounds. And then I'm gonna go ahead and contract, where we're just really hitting till this number will start to go back down. It'll fortunately track well for me. So we go ahead and lock this down. And that number's going down. So I got 165.4. We can go ahead and use that. This thing is great to plot this zone. So I can use this app just to directly do it if I want. Otherwise, we can do a quick calculation of 165. So I'm gonna go ahead and start session. I'll just show you a few of these as we're doing it this way. So we're just trying to get into this red zone with this thing. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're holding it for 3, 4, 5 in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is also a great way to then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is also a great way to then be able to take that number, if you don't want to always use this, and go ahead and go to just your static implement. And then I know what that force more feels like. So I can probably hit that right here of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I know that's not my absolute max right there. That's closer to that 80% feeling I just had. So let's watch the numbers go up. So also, if you are traveling, if you're outside, this is a great way to do this, but something like a padded foot sling is a great way to get yourself set up without having to cart around a deadlift platform or something similar. Just make sure you put that towards the base around your heel so that you're not really uncomfortable through your foot, right? And a solid shoe is also a good way to go, but we're gonna do the same thing of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with that. Now, I will say a word of caution on the concentric to end this out is our fingers have this very strong locking mechanism to the connective tissue, especially through the PIP and DIP joints. And so if you are approaching, your concentric, and for a lot of the concentric, we also do the eccentric, and we just kind of get back into position to do point A to point B. I find when I'm about 60% of my max concentric, that locking mechanism will engage in the fingers, and it's hard to open your fingers back up. I'm going to demonstrate what that looks like. It's not a good idea to forcibly open them under load. I'll show you what we do instead, but I'm going to do this one-handed to kind of demonstrate. And it isn't the most pleasant looking thing either. It doesn't feel that pleasant whatsoever. So if I go ahead and open my hand up, and then I'm going to go flex in here, right? So MCP joint, and then I'm trying to open my hand up, and then if I just kind of go a bit more slack, you see it suddenly catches like that, right? It just suddenly unfurls, and I can feel it's not that great through especially the PIP joints of these fingers, not what I want to do. So instead, as we get closer to a max, what you want to be doing is I stand up, flex in there, lower it, unload. With the isometric overcoming, because it's not actually pulling actively, I'm pulling against it, then I can go ahead and easily open my hand up without that load falling out. So we just lift it, pull it in, lower it till it's on the ground, open my hand up without that load on there, lift it again. If you end up doing more of an endurance kind of workout, you'll find that you can hit a load that's reasonable to open and close. We're not really focused on eliminating the eccentric as much as making sure that we're not eccentrically forcibly opening our hand up under load, which is really about 60% of our max concentric. So really when you're doing a strength training routine, then we're probably eliminating that eccentric altogether in this case. Not as energy conservation, but again, because the connective tissue and your joints will appreciate it.